Hello, my name's Inez, and this is the story of how my sister asked me to hand over a piece of the company I built from scratch as a wedding gift to her fiancé. At first, I thought it was a joke. Then she smiled like it was love. Then came the contract with my forged signature. Then came the silence when I asked my parents to back me up. They said, "Don't cause waves." She said, "You owe me everything." And when I refused, they all said I ruined the family. But what happens when a woman stops playing the part they wrote for her and writes her own? I hadn't sat down at my parents' dining table in months, not for lack of invitation, they extended them often enough, but because I always knew these dinners came with an undercurrent. Some subtle probe into my personal life, a sharp comment from my mother cloaked in sweet concern, a conversation that left me wondering why I showed up at all. But that evening in early March, something about my sister's tone on the phone made me believe it might be different. "You'll be there, right?" Callista had asked, her voice syrupy, casual. "It's just family, no big production, I promise." That should have been my first clue. My sister doesn't do no big production. I drove from downtown Austin to Round Rock that afternoon, windows down, letting the breeze chase away my hesitation. It was one of those mild spring evenings when the air still holds a trace of winter. The sky had a golden hue that made everything look softer than it felt. As I pulled into my parents' driveway, the house looked unchanged. White brick, red shutters, flower pots my mother still arranged like clockwork. Inside, the smell of baked salmon and rosemary potatoes tried to warm the edges of something colder. "Look who finally shows up," my mother, Vera, chirped, leaning in for a kiss that barely brushed my cheek. "You look tired." "Working too much again?" "It's been a big month," I replied, shrugging off my coat. "We just launched a statewide pilot with 4 school districts." "Still doing that education app thing?" she asked, smiling like it was a bake sale project. Lowell, my father, stood at the far end of the living room, holding a whiskey glass. He gave a brief nod, no smile. That was about as warm as he got. Callista arrived last, as always, wearing a cream blouse with tailored pants like she'd stepped out of a catalog. Dorian trailed behind her, handsome and polished in that bland real estate agent kind of way. "Baby sis," she said, arms outstretched, voice a full octave higher than normal. "Glad you could join the rest of us common folk tonight." I returned her hug stiffly. "Wouldn't miss it." Dinner began predictably. Mom asked about my health. Dad asked nothing. Dorian barely spoke. Callista played moderator, bouncing between stories of venue scouting and bridal party drama. Somewhere between the salmon and dessert, she tapped her wine glass gently with a fork. "Before we wrap up this lovely evening," she said, standing, "I just want to take a moment to thank someone very dear to me." I glanced at my mother. She looked pleased. Dorian looked rehearsed. Callista continued, her eyes settling on me. "My amazing little sister," she said, "has generously agreed to gift a portion of her company to Dorian and me as a wedding present. Isn't that incredible?" It took me a second to process what I'd just heard. My fork paused mid-air. What?" I said, the word catching in my throat, but no one noticed. Everyone was already clapping. My father raised his glass. My mother beamed like she was accepting the gift herself. I forced a smile and raised my glass a little too late. My cheeks burned, but not from pride. "Just a small stake," Callista whispered later as we cleared plates. "It's mostly symbolic. Don't overthink it. Symbolic." That word echoed. She leaned closer. "It's already in motion. Don't make this awkward, Inez." I looked at her, really looked. The way she held herself, confident, like someone who knew she wouldn't be questioned. Someone who'd never been told no. "You should be proud," my mother chimed in behind me. "It's beautiful what you're doing. Family first, right?" I swallowed the urge to scream. "Sure, family." After dessert, the guests thinned out. Dorian chatted with my dad about a land deal. My mother disappeared into the kitchen. That's when Callista approached, envelope in hand. "Here," she said sweetly. "No pressure, just a formality." I took the envelope. It was heavier than I expected. "Look, I know it seems fast," she added, her voice softening, "but this isn't about money. It's about legacy. It's about trust. You trust us, don't you? She kissed my cheek again and turned away. I stood there, in the hallway, alone, envelope clutched in my hand. The sound of laughter drifted from the dining room, my family, celebrating a decision I hadn't made. The envelope warmed in my palm, like it might burn through skin if I held it too long. I didn't open it, not yet. I just stood there, frozen, listening. The drive back to my apartment that night was silent. No music, no news, not even the occasional buzz from my phone. I didn't turn on the lights when I stepped inside. I dropped my purse by the door, kicked off my shoes, and set the envelope down on the coffee table like it was contaminated. Then I just sat there, staring at it, while the city's hum filtered in through the windows behind me. Sleep didn't come easy. I lay in bed, turning over every glance Callista gave me, every word that slipped from her polished mouth, trying to pinpoint when the trap had been set. Somewhere between family first and don't make this awkward, I had gone from little sister to leverage. By morning, my throat was dry, my body stiff from a night of half sleep. The envelope still sat on the table, untouched but looming. It felt heavier than it should have, like it had absorbed the tension in the room overnight. I made myself coffee first. I needed something warm to hold before I tore into whatever betrayal Callista had dressed in legalese. I opened the flap gently, like expecting something fragile. What I found wasn't fragile at all. It was sharp, calculated. The document inside wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was a nearly finalized equity transfer agreement, naming Dorian Vexley as a minority shareholder in my company. At the bottom of page 2, my name appeared in neat, practiced cursive. Except it wasn't mine. I don't sign my name like that, not with a looped B or the wide spacing between first and last. But it was close enough to pass at a glance, close enough to raise every hair on the back of my neck. I pressed the papers flat and took pictures of each page. Then I texted Molly, my in-house legal consultant. Hey, need you to confirm if this came from us. Found something disturbing. She replied within minutes. I didn't prep this, but it's one of our templates, modified last week. You didn't request it? No, I wrote back. Can you pull who accessed it? Molly took her time. I walked around my apartment, pacing, refilling my coffee, glancing back at the envelope like it might explode. The sun was barely up, but my mind was already racing 2 steps ahead. Finally, Molly sent another message. User was Inez B, so, you? Nope, I responded. That's me, but I didn't log anything last week. She added, timestamp was 11:24 p.m., February 22nd. We also log IPs if you want full trace. Yes, please pull it. And don't say anything to anyone yet. I hung up and sat back on the edge of my couch, staring out at the quiet skyline. If this was a mistake, I'd deal with it. But if someone forged my name, if someone entered my company's legal system pretending to be me, that was war. By late morning, I had the trace log from our CTO, Neil. I knew I could trust him. We started the company together 5 years ago from a Starbucks and a co-working space that smelled like floor cleaner and desperation. He didn't ask questions when I sent him the file. Just, want me to dig? I replied with one word. Yes. He called back 30 minutes later. Inez, I traced the IP. You're not gonna like it. I braced myself. Go on. It's registered to a residential router tied to a property in Georgetown, he said. And that property's in the name of Dorian Vexley. There it was. I exhaled through my nose, eyes locked on the screen like it had just accused me of something. You're sure? Sure as I'm sitting here. Whoever accessed that template used your login credentials from his home Wi-Fi. This wasn't random. I thanked him and hung up. I sat still for a while, the hum of my refrigerator suddenly deafening. I thought about how many times I'd heard Dorian say he didn't care for tech stuff, or that Callista handled all that business mumbo-jumbo. What a convenient way to duck behind the curtain while rerouting the spotlight. I opened my laptop and started securing everything: email, internal tools, admin logins. Then I opened a blank document and typed a new title: Timeline of Misuse. That's when another message appeared on my screen. Not an email, an internal platform message from our secure feedback tool. Normally, it was anonymous for staff to submit complaints or requests, but this one had a name, or a letter, rather. Watch your permissions. Not everyone who smiles at you is on your side. ZZ? I didn't know anyone in the company who signed with that. I scanned the back-end logs and found it was submitted from one of the junior dev accounts. Zara Lyle. Zara barely spoke. She was quiet, came to work in the same faded denim jacket every day, and kept her headphones on like a shield. But she noticed things. I replied simply, "Noted. Thank you." She didn't respond, but the message had landed. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't paranoid, and I wasn't alone. I leaned back, letting the chair tilt until it hit the stop. Then I stared at the ceiling for a long time. My sister and her fiancé had orchestrated something beneath the surface, smiling through every dinner, every bridal shower, every fake compliment about how impressive I'd become. I had to get ahead of it, before Callista turned this into her narrative, before Dorian handed out shares that weren't his to give, before anyone else believed their version of events. I reached for my phone and dialed Isidra. She was my CFO and one of the few people I trusted implicitly. "Morning," she said groggily. "You okay?" "Not yet," I said. "But I need to ask you something serious." "Shoot. If I told you someone accessed our legal templates using my credentials and that someone lives with my sister, what would you do?" There was a pause. "I'd say it's time to tighten every rope." Exactly. We set a meeting for that afternoon. Full system audit. Admin resets. Quietly, without alerting the board. I didn't want this to become gossip. I wanted evidence. I wanted control back. By noon, I had 3 folders on my desktop labeled Forged Access Logs Witnesses. I renamed the envelope from last night, no longer Callista Gift. Now it read, Exhibit A. The cursor blinked beneath Dorian's name like it was daring me to make the next move, and I didn't flinch. I just closed the laptop, stood, and let the silence swallow me. I walked into the kitchen, rinsed my mug, then just stood at the sink for a moment, hands resting on the edge, eyes unfocused. I could feel something changing inside me, not panic, not anger, something colder, something still. I didn't want music. I didn't want a podcast. I didn't want the television murmuring in the background like it often did when I worked late into the night. I just wanted quiet. The kind of quiet that lets the truth echo louder than any distraction. It was almost 6 in the evening when the sky outside deepened from blue to ash. Streetlights flickered on outside my window one by one. The edges of the city softened into dusk. I sat back down on the couch, letting the light of the laptop glow faintly in the room, casting long shadows behind me. That's when the message popped up. Callista, no subject line, just a line of text. I miss our closeness. Let's fix this before it turns ugly. Attached was a video file named in her typical drama, US Sisters MP4. I clicked it. Of course I clicked it. The screen faded to a home movie clip. We were little girls, barefoot in our backyard, covered in mud and laughing so hard our stomachs hurt. The audio crackled with age. I must have been 7. She was 11. In the video, she grabbed my hand and yelled at a neighbor boy who'd called me mophead. "She's smarter than you'll ever be," Callista had said. "Leave her alone." Back then, that had meant everything to me. She'd always stepped in, protected me. She was the girl who took the blame when I broke Mom's favorite vase. The sister who once gave up her prom dress money so I could go to that STEM camp in New York. I sat there, watching, remembering. Then the music shifted, softer, more polished. A smooth transition from old footage to photos, birthday parties, graduations, wedding showers. Every image perfectly curated. Every moment where she looked composed, I looked grateful. It was subtle, but undeniable. I leaned in as one photo lingered a beat too long. It was from my company's 3rd-year gala. The lighting was adjusted. My face brightened. Hers dimmed just enough to push her into the background. And then came her voice. "Inez," she said, her tone gentle, syrupy, rehearsed. "You know what love looks like, so show it." The video ended on a photo of us standing on the porch of our childhood home. I was 15, she was 19. She had her arm around me, and I was smiling so wide you'd think I believed the world was safe as long as she was near. I didn't move for a while. I just let the quiet stretch. The only sound was the soft hum of my fridge, the occasional creak of the building settling. She was playing the long game. This wasn't about sisterhood. This was theater, image control. She was turning me into a supporting role in her narrative, framed carefully to elicit sympathy, unity, loyalty, all the things she could no longer demand out loud. I opened the video again, slowed it down in the editor, watched how transitions favored her wedding theme colors. Noticed how many scenes excluded my work, my employees, my board members, replaced instead with spa days and coffee shops and the fantasy of two sisters who never drifted. It wasn't a peace offering. It was branding. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just felt something inside me click. Not break, just reposition. I whispered out loud, "I'm not part of your highlight reel anymore." Then I hit delete. The file vanished from my system, but it didn't take the sting with it. I leaned back, the couch swallowing me whole, and stared at the ceiling. No tears, just calculations. She knew what she was doing. That file wasn't meant for reconciliation. It was ammunition, in case I fought back. Something to show the world how much she tried, how much she loved, how much I refused to appreciate. A backup narrative for when her plan got ugly. And now I had to respond. Not with a message, not with a matching video, but with boundaries. Real ones. I stood, crossed the room to my desk, and opened a fresh internal memo. Subject line, urgent. Credential access policy update. I typed, effective immediately, all shared administrative access to project templates, legal repositories, and archival files will require biometric authentication from designated individuals. No exceptions. All existing logins will be reviewed and revised. No emotion, no explanation, just control. I sent it to Isidra, Neil, and our compliance lead. I didn't give them the backstory. Not yet. They'd get it when they needed to. For now, I just needed the back door locked. The clock ticked past 7:30 when I finally walked into the bathroom. My feet were cold. I'd forgotten socks. I turned on the light and faced the mirror. There I was, same dark circles, same slight crease between my brows, same woman who'd let her sister walk over every boundary because the word family had been used like a leash for far too long. I said nothing. Just stared, waiting for the tears that didn't come. I set a calendar alert on my laptop. Meet with legal, prepare plan B. Then I closed the lid with a soft click, pressed my palm flat against the smooth surface of my desk, and sat back in my chair, staring out at the evening haze rolling across the skyline. The windows had started to fog with the shift in temperature, the last light of the sun bleeding into a darker blue. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, thin and mechanical, swallowed by the hum of the city. That night, I slept less than 4 hours. It wasn't stress, not anymore. That phase had passed. The sleeplessness came from something deeper now. Awareness, the kind that burrows beneath the skin once you've seen too much, heard too much, uncovered the circuitry behind the illusion. There's no going back after you've seen how the machinery works behind the curtain, no returning to the comfort of, maybe it's just me. I'd crossed a threshold. And thresholds don't come with exit doors. 2 days later, I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom, smoothing down the front of a navy blue dress I hadn't worn in over a year. The fabric felt heavier than I remembered, or maybe that was just the weight of the afternoon ahead. I looked at myself, wishing for any other excuse to stay home, any plausible out that wouldn't trigger a phone call or a lecture. But Vera had insisted. She'd called me twice the night before, her voice honeyed with that performative warmth she used when she wanted to play the diplomat. "It's just brunch, Inez. 90 minutes. You can sit, smile, and be civil. For family." Family. That word again, always a leash, never a lifeline. The Driscoll was every bit the Baroque Texas monument it promised to be. Polished to gleam. Crystal chandeliers overhead. A live string trio playing chamber music in the corner like they'd been airlifted in from a royal wedding. Floral arrangements overflowed from every corner, vases as tall as my torso, an overcompensation for something that had no real bloom left. Callista didn't believe in subtle. She never had. This wasn't a brunch. This was a coronation, an engagement brunch dressed like a reception. As I walked into the room, I felt the temperature drop. Not the air, but the conversation. A shift in the room's energy, the way people instinctively modulate when someone they've discussed behind closed doors steps into view. Smiles sharpened, then blurred, heads tilted with practiced curiosity. No one said anything directly. That would have been gauche. Instead, a well-dressed event coordinator ushered me toward a table near the back, close to a side door, half shielded by a decorative column. The placement said it all. "We invited you, but don't confuse that with inclusion." The place card in front of my setting read, Inez B. Just that. No last name. No titles. Not Berenger, not founder, not even sister of the bride. An initial, a placeholder, a technicality. I picked it up between two fingers, flipped it over, then set it down again, face down. My mother brushed past me a few minutes later, hand grazing my shoulder as lightly as an afterthought. "Let's not make a scene, honey. Smile. You're here. That's what matters." Before I could respond, she had already drifted off, kissing someone else's cheek, moving through the room like a well-oiled diplomat. Avoidance disguised as grace. I scanned the crowd. Callista stood in the center, radiant in white. Of course, her hair was swept up in a complicated updo, artfully messy in the way that takes an hour and two stylists. She looked like a southern debutante reinvented for social media. Flanking her were Dorian and two women from her bride tribe, all beaming, all curated. She laughed easily, one hand lightly brushing Dorian's shoulder. I sat quietly, sipped my sparkling water, and tried not to look at my phone. There was no dignity in escape. Not yet. As brunch wound down and plates were being cleared, the trio shifted into a slow, sentimental rendition of Can't Help Falling in Love. The servers brought out tiny desserts shaped like swans and hearts, and then the familiar clink of glass. Callista stood. All conversation dropped. She held her champagne flute with the precision of someone who had practiced this moment, likely in front of her mirror. "I just want to say a few words," she began, her voice projected effortlessly. "Today isn't just about celebration. It's about recognizing the people who made this new chapter possible." She paused dramatically, letting the silence cradle the anticipation. "And I'd especially like to thank someone very dear to me, someone who has supported me, challenged me, and stood beside me when it mattered most. My sister, Inez." Every head in the room turned. I felt my back straighten instinctively, muscle memory trained by years of forced performance. I blinked, but didn't smile. "Your generosity means everything to us," she continued, her voice syrupy. "Your decision to share your success, to gift a portion of your company as a wedding present, is more than kind. It's a symbol of how strong our family bond truly is." Applause. Real, sustained, unhesitating. People turned toward me with admiration, nods, raised glasses. Some clapped with genuine delight, others with politeness, but no one questioned her words. I lifted my glass slightly, just high enough to acknowledge the attention, not high enough to affirm the lie. Inside, something coiled. She'd rewritten the story, again, this time in front of 60 people who would carry her version out into the world like gospel. That night, back in my apartment, I peeled off the navy dress like it had been weighing down my skin. I changed into sweatpants and poured a glass of water. At the kitchen table, I opened my laptop. My inbox was waiting. Subject line: Congratulations. A longtime investor. Eager. Pleased. Heard about the new leadership edition. Can't wait to see how Dorian strengthens the team. We should connect soon about next steps. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened a folder on my desktop labeled Containment. Inside, screenshots, email logs, time-stamped files, every relevant call transcript, meeting notes, legal drafts, recorded statements. It wasn't for revenge. Not yet. It was for clarity. It was for the record. Because I knew what was coming. And I knew if I didn't act, Callista would control the narrative again. She would rewrite the story until I was erased from my own work, my own legacy. I started building a private timeline, chronological, meticulous. Who said what and when? What had changed and how? At one point, I stopped typing and looked up at the blank wall across from my desk. I said it aloud, to no one. You wanted a performance? Fine. I whispered it, but it landed like truth. You'll get one, but it's the last one you'll ever write for me. Then I saved the file and scheduled a meeting with my attorney. This time, the story would be mine to tell. The calendar pinged. Dinner, final talk. But I didn't open the invite right away. I just stared at it for a few minutes, letting the implications settle like dust on a forgotten shelf. My eyes drifted to the clock in the corner of the screen. It was just after 10 in the morning. Sunlight filtered through the blinds in long, uneven lines across the floor. I reached for my coffee, took a sip, and set it down without tasting it. That's when the knock came, not loud, but firm, professional. I opened the door to find a courier standing on the other side, holding a sleek envelope with a gold-stamped return address. McCall Sons Legal Group, my parents' longtime attorney. Mr. Berenger? The courier asked. Yes. Signature, please. I signed, took the envelope, and closed the door behind me. I didn't sit. I didn't even go back to my desk. I opened it standing there in the middle of my living room, like if I read it quickly enough, it might change. The letter inside was thick with implication and wrapped in faux civility. They'd been informed, that was the word they used, that I had initiated preliminary steps toward transferring ownership of a non-controlling interest in Berenger Learning Technologies. The document said the firm was grateful for my willingness to support the future of the Fen-Vexley Union and was ready to finalize the agreement in a timely manner. They included a draft closing document with a scheduled signing date 2 weeks out. Not one sentence asked for confirmation, not one referred to my direct consent. It was as if I had nodded along at dinner, smiled graciously at brunch, and handed over years of work like party favors. I read the letter 3 times, then I read it again. There wasn't a single reference to my intention, just vague legal jargon about verbal alignment and anticipated mutual interest. They didn't care what I actually said. They cared what Callista told them I said. I walked into my office, closed the door, and sat at my desk. I opened a blank document titled Response to McCall. I started typing, the first few lines as sharp as a blade. To whom it may concern, your assumptions regarding my intent are categorically false, but after 5 paragraphs, I stopped. My hands hovered over the keyboard. My heart was pounding, but not from fear, from disappointment, exhaustion. I saved the draft, minimized the window, and leaned back in my chair, staring up at the ceiling. There was only one place to go, one person left who might understand the gravity of what this meant, if he chose to understand at all. I drove to Round Rock that afternoon. The trees lining the familiar road still wore the fresh green of early spring. The same mailbox stood at the edge of the driveway, its paint chipped at the corners. My mother's car was gone, which was exactly what I'd hoped for. I rang the bell and waited. Lowell opened the door. He didn't smile. He never really did. Hey, I said. Do you have a minute? He stepped aside without a word, and I followed him into the kitchen. He poured himself a glass of iced tea, offered none to me, and sat down at the table like we were about to talk about car maintenance. I pulled the letter from my bag and set it on the table. I got this today, I said, tapping the envelope, from McCall. He didn't touch it, just looked at me like he was waiting for the punchline. They're acting like I've agreed to give part of my company to Callista and Dorian, I said, like it's already happening. Still nothing. I never said yes, Dad. I never agreed. I never even hinted at it. He took a sip of his tea, then looked past me, out the window. Callista said it was a done deal. Of course she did, I said, the words coming sharper now. She also said she saved me from bullies and gave up her life for mine. Doesn't make it true. He blinked. Inez, no, I said, cutting him off. You need to hear this. I've spent my whole life letting her rewrite our family story. She gets to be the golden child. And I'm what? The support staff? Background noise in her highlight reel? He finally met my eyes. Maybe it's better not to cause waves. My breath caught. Excuse me? He looked down at his tea like it had become fascinating. Sometimes in families, it's better to keep things calm. I stared at him, waiting for more. Nothing. You didn't raise me to be silent, I said. My voice cracked, but I kept going. But you're asking me to be now. You're asking me to hand over something I built because it's easier than calling her out. He didn't argue, didn't explain. He just stood and walked out of the room. I sat there alone at the kitchen table for a few more minutes, watching the condensation on his glass form a perfect ring on the wood. Then I picked up the letter, folded it back into the envelope, and left without closing the front door behind me. The drive back felt different. Yeah, I wasn't angry, not the hot kind. I wasn't even sad. What I felt was something colder, something solidifying. That night, I opened my laptop and stared at the rebuttal draft. I hovered over the delete button for a long time before clicking it. Then, I opened a secure folder I'd named months ago when I thought I might need it someday. It was called Plan B, Retain Control. Inside were contracts, ownership records, internal protocols. I texted Isidra. We're not waiting anymore. Tomorrow, clean house access, strip shared logins. She replied almost immediately. On it. Before I went to bed, I checked my email one last time. A new message had arrived. From Callista. Subject: Dinner. Final talk. You're going to want to see this. They leaked something. That was the text I woke up to. Isidra never sent messages that early unless something was on fire. Or about to be. I didn't even brush my teeth before grabbing my phone and clicking the link she included. It led to a screenshot of a forwarded email chain. The message at the bottom was from Callista's PR assistant, sent to several mutual contacts and industry partners. The subject line: Exciting family business synergy. The message itself was sugar-laced poison. Following Inez's beautiful gesture of unity, we're proud to announce that Behringer Learning Technologies is embracing a shared vision. With the upcoming wedding, Dorian will begin playing an active role in strategic partnerships moving forward. No official signatures, no legal attachments, just enough polish to seem authentic and just enough ambiguity to let people assume the worst. I closed the file, sat up in bed, and stared at the ceiling. They were doing it. They were laundering their story through other people's inboxes. This wasn't just manipulation, it was strategic misrepresentation. By the time I stepped into my office later that morning, I had already received 3 additional messages, 2 congratulatory emails from former partners I hadn't spoken to in over a year, and one rather condescending, looking forward to seeing how you manage the transition note from an investor who'd once tried to lecture me about softening my leadership tone. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I called a meeting with Neil, our CTO. We didn't do small talk. I got right to it. I need you to pull every IP access log from the last 30 days. Filter by any activity involving draft equity agreements or permission shifts. Neil didn't blink. Want me to include mobile sessions? Yes, I said. Everything, especially off-hours access. Got it. Within an hour, I had what I needed. The IP matched one registered to Dorian's home address. And not just once. He'd been logging into our back-end systems over a period of 3 weeks. Always late at night. Always after Callista had checked in with me about the wedding. The smoking gun wasn't a single moment. It was a pattern. I took a breath, looked at Neil, and said, Secure everything. Change shared logins. Encrypt archives. Send me a list of new permissions. Only you, me, and Isidra get admin level. Understood. After he left, I sat down and opened a document titled Declaration of Ownership. 1 page. Simple language. I, Inez Behringer, am the sole founder and legal owner of Behringer Learning Technologies. Any claims to the contrary are unsubstantiated and will be met with formal response. I saved it, printed it, signed it, And then I did something I'd never done before. I sent it to our entire advisory board without copying Callista, without warning her, without preamble. It was time I started moving without broadcasting my every step. That evening, I forced myself to show up at a networking mixer in downtown Austin. I didn't want to go, but if I stayed home, Callista would keep filling the silence with her version of the truth. I was barely 3 sips into a weak vodka tonic when someone I vaguely knew, a former colleague from a nonprofit panel, sidled up next to me and smiled. "So," she said, eyes dancing with faux curiosity, "I heard you offered shares to help with your sister's wedding. That's incredibly generous." I blinked. "Did you hear that from Callista?" "Well," she said with a shrug, "let's just say it's going around." "It's false," I said, keeping my tone even. Her smile froze for half a second. "Oh, wow, okay, I didn't mean anything by it." "Of course not," I said, setting my drink down. "But next time you hear something about me, maybe ask me first. I'm not that hard to reach." She walked away, and I stood there, feeling a chill creep up my spine. Not the kind that makes you shiver, but the kind that makes you want to start boarding up windows. This was what it looked like to be outplayed in public. But not for long. I went home that night and drafted 2 memos. The first was internal. All system access not registered under executive credentials would be revoked. Immediately. The second was external. All media inquiries regarding company structure would be routed through legal. No exceptions. Then I sent a short, private message to Isidra. They wanted me out of my own story. They thought I'd stay quiet. She wrote back, "You ready?" I answered, "More than ever." I sat in my chair for a long time after that. Not angry, not afraid, focused. This wasn't about winning anymore. It was about not losing myself. I didn't ask any questions. I didn't need to. The moment Isidra's voice tightened on the other end of the call, I already knew what kind of betrayal was waiting on my screen. I opened the file she forwarded. Another draft PR release. This one not from investors or press contacts, but from Callista's wedding team. Subject line, "A legacy of sisters, a future shared." The text was a masterclass in manipulation. Following Inez's inspiring gesture of trust and unity, it began, "We are thrilled to welcome Dorian into our shared family legacy, not only by marriage, but by vision." It read like I'd handed over the company in a champagne-fueled moment of sisterly devotion. There was even a line suggesting a co-founder's blessing, which made my skin crawl. I didn't throw my laptop across the room. I didn't scream into the empty air. I simply stood up, walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and drank it slowly, cold, controlled. Then, as if the universe were timing it for cinematic effect, a knock at the door. Not firm like the courier from McCall. This was softer, hesitant. I opened it to find no one standing there, but a small padded envelope rested at my feet. No return address. My name written in slanted handwriting I didn't recognize. I carried it inside and opened it with scissors, careful not to tear whatever was inside. A letter, folded tightly, and a single photo. The photo was faded but intact. A woman about my age standing in front of a brick building, a plaque behind her that read, "Madsen Education Group." A handwritten note on the back, May 2015. "I used to stand here proud." The letter inside was more precise than I expected. No dramatic introduction, no backstory, just lines like blades. "I was you once. I built something out of nothing, and I loved someone who told me that love meant sharing. He said we'd be stronger together, that family didn't need contracts. So I handed him equity, ignored the warning signs, and told myself it was just paperwork. I kept reading, barely breathing. He left 6 months later, took half the company with him, said it was his right, marital property laws. The courts agreed, and I learned the hard way that no one mourns the woman who gave too much. They just take what she left behind and keep walking. The final sentence was burned into my mind. "Don't let them dress up theft as devotion." No signature, just an initial, O. I sat down and held the letter like it might slip away if I blinked. For a moment, I let my eyes fall shut. Not from exhaustion, from clarity. 2 days later, Vera invited me to dinner. "It's not a trap," she said over the phone. "It's just family. We need to talk calmly. No more lawyers. No more cold shoulders." I agreed, but not because I believed her. I needed to see it for myself, what line they'd cross next. The house looked the same as always. Clean, orderly. A candle burning on the entryway table, music humming faintly from the dining room. Callista and Dorian were already seated at the long oak table, both in shades of soft beige like they'd coordinated on a lifestyle brand shoot. Vera greeted me at the door with a kiss on the cheek and a tight smile. "Let's sit," she said. I did. No one touched their plates. Instead, Vera stood and walked to the living room, retrieving a thick photo album, the kind bound in leather, heavy with time. She placed it in front of me, her fingers resting gently on the cover. "Inez," she began, voice already trembling. "You may not remember all this, but we do. Your sister did so much for you." She opened the book, page after page of childhood photos. Callista tying my shoes, Callista helping me with homework, Callista standing at my graduation, every image carefully selected, every memory framed through her lens. "She carried you through everything," Vera said, her voice catching. "She made sacrifices you don't even know about." Callista added softly, "I never asked for anything in return. Until now." Vera turned to a page where I was crying at age 6, my face red, while Callista held me. "You owe her," Vera whispered. "This is your moment to show her what she's always shown you." Then, with her voice cracking, "If you don't do this, we lose everything." I stared at the page. I closed the album gently. Then I stood. Everyone went quiet. "If everything depends on me disappearing," I said calmly, "then maybe it deserves to be lost." I left the book on the table. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't slam the door. I walked out, got in my car, and drove back into the city without turning on the radio. Back at my apartment, the skyline lit up around me like it always did. Steady. Impersonal. I pulled up the video file on my desktop, the one I'd started crafting weeks ago but hadn't dared to finish. I clicked into it, called the AV team. "The video file. Load it," I said. "I'm sending it." The moment I ended the call with the AV team, I walked to the window and stared out at the early light filtering through downtown Austin. Sunday mornings always had a strange stillness to them, like the whole city was holding its breath. I held mine too, for a few seconds longer than usual, before finally exhaling. The decision was made. I wouldn't be attending Callista's wedding. At 8:14 a.m., my phone buzzed with one final message from Vera. "There's still time to come do the right thing." I didn't reply. I didn't open the message. I forwarded it to a folder I'd labeled Preserve. Then I opened a separate thread and texted Isidra. "Run it." No emoji, no further explanation. I showered, pulled on a gray cotton shirt and jeans, and made a pot of tea. I didn't feel like wine, not today. My stomach couldn't have handled the weight of it. I settled into my worn armchair, opened my laptop, and pulled up the live event feed. The venue was already buzzing. The Travis County Hall had been converted into what looked like a curated magazine spread. Floral arches, crystal chandeliers, subtle pink uplighting. The guests were arriving, all dressed in pale spring tones. I spotted familiar faces, colleagues, old family friends, people who'd once congratulated me for making something out of nothing. At 10:30 sharp, the ceremony began. Dorian stood tall at the altar, his tailored suit hugging his shoulders like it had been made for ambition. Callista entered the frame shortly after, radiant in a backless lace gown, hair swept into soft waves. The crowd stood and turned, as if choreographed. She beamed like nothing had ever touched her, like betrayal was just a word that happened to other people. I didn't watch the vows. I muted the feed and waited for the moment after the toasts, the point when the attention would settle, the energy would soften, and everyone would be ready to absorb something they hadn't prepared for. At exactly 12:07 p.m., the lights in the reception hall dimmed slightly, and the projector screen lowered. I could see the confusion ripple through the room. The screen flashed black, Then, white text appeared. There are always two sides to a story. Here's mine. I sipped my tea as the first image appeared, a screenshot of the draft contract Callista's team had claimed I approved, followed by the server logs showing Dorian's access from his home IP. Then, a clip of Callista's voice on a recorded phone call. She'll cave, she always does. The room on screen had gone utterly silent. Forks paused mid-air. A few people looked toward Callista, whose smile had frozen like a mask cracking under pressure. Then came my voice, measured, calm, steady. I never asked to be part of a performance. I never agreed to be the backdrop for someone else's story. This isn't about ruining a day. It's about reclaiming years of silence. I built something with my own hands. They tried to take it using mine. I won't let them. The video faded to black. No music, no applause, nothing. I watched as Dorian turned to Callista and muttered something that made her step back. Someone in the corner of the room slowly clapped. An older woman I vaguely recognized from church events. She stood, nodded toward the screen, then walked out. Callista remained rooted. Vera stood behind her, one hand pressed to her chest. Then, without a word, she slumped into her chair. The feed cut to static. I closed the laptop and set it aside. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I stood, refilled my teacup, and walked over to the window. Outside, kids were riding bikes. A couple walked a dog. Someone waved to a neighbor across the street. Life continued, as it always did. When I checked my inbox an hour later, the subject lines were endless. I'm so sorry. Did you really do all that alone? You weren't the villain. You were the warning. Some people apologized. Others confessed they'd believed Callista's version until now. A few simply sent emojis or GIFs, not knowing how else to engage with a woman who had just burned down the illusion everyone else was comfortable living in. But there was one message that caught my eye. It was from someone I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. Subject, your voice. I watched what you did. I've been where you were. I didn't speak. I lost everything. You didn't. I hope you keep speaking. I didn't reply. Not yet. I leaned back in my chair, tea cooling beside me, and looked out the window again. And then, at 3:42 p.m., a final message popped up. From Vera Berenger. Subject, your behavior. You are no longer invited to any future Berenger events. It had been 2 weeks since the wedding. 14 days of deliberate silence from some corners of my life and haunting echoes from others. The kind of silence that feels like someone shutting a door without slamming it. The kind that hangs in the air, heavy and waiting to be named. The day after the video played, the one that lit up the reception like an unexpected electrical fire, exposing secrets in high definition and freezing the room into stunned quiet. I disappeared. I didn't post. I didn't take calls. I didn't offer statements or rebuttals or apologies. I let the dust rise, and I waited for it to settle on its own. As it turns out, silence often says everything louder than words ever could. On the Monday morning of the second week, I sat alone in my office, a space that still felt like a work in progress despite having moved in months ago. Lukewarm coffee rested between my palms. The light filtering through the blinds cut the room into rectangles of gold and shadow. The computer screen glowed with unread headlines. I hadn't been brave enough to click on them until now. I didn't know what I expected: scandal, shame, spectacle, maybe all three. But instead, I found this. PR exec faces ethics review after family footage goes viral. Berenger sisters break ties. Sources say lawsuits unlikely but not off the table. Marriage delayed. Sources close to Vexley confirm partnership on pause. I read each line slowly, carefully, like running my fingers over the outline of a bruise, learning its shape before it could fade. There were no lawsuits pending, no criminal complaints, no public apologies, but the reputations? Those had cracked. And in this city, when the surface cracked, it didn't heal. It widened. Dorian's real estate firm released a statement late Friday. We have chosen to part ways, mutually and respectfully, with Mr. Vexley. We wish him the best in his future endeavors. the company remains committed to reflecting the highest ethical standards in both leadership and culture. Polite as betrayal always is. He wasn't fired, but he wasn't invited to stay either. Callista, on the other hand, vanished from public life like she'd never been there. Her name quietly disappeared from 2 upcoming event flyers. Her agency issued no statement, but everyone knew what indefinite leave meant in this industry. Her team was rattled. Internal whispers said no one expected her to return, but no one dared say it out loud. Not yet. Outside my office window, traffic moved steadily along Congress Avenue. Business as usual. Morning joggers, people in suits, dog walkers, horns blaring in the distance. The world hadn't ended. My world had just shifted. The cursor blinked at me on the screen, and then a new email. No subject, no preamble, from my father. I opened it with the kind of breath you take before diving into cold water. Inside was a scanned photo of the front page of the New York Times, folded neatly to show the coverage of the wedding fallout. The digital copy of an obscure book was attached, an essay collection he'd always liked. It was about stoicism, I remembered. Grace under fire. Marcus Aurelius quotes and dry metaphors about strength. No note, no I'm proud of you, no I'm sorry. Just an intellectual pat on the shoulder, like always. And strangely, it didn't sting, it didn't pierce, it simply confirmed what I'd known all along. He was never going to say what mattered, not directly, only through quotes or secondhand reflections, only through gifts that arrived years too late, wrapped in silence. At 3:04 p.m., the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a small cardboard box addressed from San Marcos. The return label was typed, no sender listed. Inside, a letter. A different one, Ophalie. Inez, what you did. Few do. Not because they can't, but because they've been told it's not worth the noise. I believed that lie. I handed over everything and didn't even fight. You didn't. That matters. I'm building something. A space for women who've been written out of their own stories. If you're ready to turn fire into structure, I'd like you to help me shape it. You in? I read it twice, then again. There was no flattery, no dramatic language, just truth, honest, blunt, earned, sent from a woman who had lived in the ashes long enough to know where fire begins. I walked to the kitchen, poured fresh tea, and then I typed my reply. Let's make sure no one else has to survive like we did. I hit send, closed the laptop. That evening, I pulled on a light sweater and walked down to Lady Bird Lake. The path was exactly how I remembered it, winding beside the water like a thread through memory. Joggers weaving past, dogs tugging leashes, kids feeding ducks, even though the signs said not to. I found an empty bench. Sat. Let my hands rest in my lap. Across the trail, a couple stood beneath the trees, wedding photos in progress. The bride, radiant, was laughing at something the groom whispered. He kissed her hand like the world didn't exist outside their circle, and I didn't feel bitterness or envy, just recognition. There was a time I wanted that, but now I wanted something else. Not proof of love, but proof of self. I stood, brushed imaginary crumbs from my jeans, walked again. When I got home, I poured out the rest of the tea, rinsed the mug, placed it upside down on the rack. There was one more message waiting. Subject, none. Sender, Vera. Inez, we saw the footage again. It was unnecessary. Cruel. I hope you're happy. You are no longer invited to any future Behringer events. I stared at the words. Then calmly, I moved the message into a folder labeled Dead Ends, no response, no anger, just closure. I never got a thank you for protecting myself. But I don't need one anymore. Sometimes, family isn't defined by blood, it's defined by boundaries. What I learned wasn't how to fight harder, but how to stop fighting for people who never saw me as more than a resource. So let me ask you, have you ever been told that protecting your peace made you selfish? Or that saying no meant you didn't love them enough? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And if this one moved you, hit Hit subscribe, because there are more stories like mine waiting to be told.